What would you do if one day you woke up and realized that the warm hugs from your children were nothing more than a pretty shell hiding raw greed? What if the only hand that held yours when you were at your weakest wasn't your own child's, but that of a stranger? Someone who never shared a holiday meal with you, who never once called you Mom. Then tell me what truly defines family. My name is Evelyn Claire. I'm 67 years old. I live alone in a small wooden cottage by the sea in Monterey, where the ocean breeze slips in each morning, and the afternoon sun falls like honey onto the porch steps. After my husband passed, I never remarried. Not because I didn't need someone by my side, but because I believed I already had everything in my two children, Lily and Grant. I raised them with blood, with tears, with sleepless nights working 3 jobs just to afford their college tuition. I thought that if I poured enough love into them, one day, they'd love me back, not out of obligation, not because of what I had, but simply because they wanted to. But I was wrong. It all began when the doctor said I needed rest and assistance. Just days later, both my children, who were usually too busy to even call on my birthday, suddenly started showing up. They brought wine. They smiled. They asked gentle questions in voices so sweet it felt suffocating. Lily massaged my shoulders and asked how I was sleeping. Grant's eyes wandered around the house, lingering too long on the safe behind the bookshelf. I said nothing. I didn't accuse. I simply began to record every word, every gift, every time they asked about the will, until one night I collapsed in the bathroom. I called. No one answered. They were out partying. The only person who heard my cry for help was Julio, the part-time caregiver I had hired, a Mexican immigrant. A man who never asked for anything but the wage he earned. Julio didn't hesitate. He came immediately, rushed me to the hospital, tucked me in, bought warm soup, and stayed by my side until I drifted into sleep. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't wanted to believe. Not everyone who shares your blood shares your heart. And not everyone who's a stranger remains one. I am Evelyn Claire, and this is the story of how I gave up everything for someone the world called a stranger, because when my family walked away, he stayed. Welcome to Sarah Stories, where we tell stories that may bring tears to your eyes, or cause you to rethink everything you thought you knew. If this story has already touched something inside you, stay until the very end, because the ending is one you won't forget. And if you believe that every story holds a truth worth sharing, please subscribe to Sarah Stories. Your support gives us the strength to keep telling more stories, deeper, richer, and more human than ever. Thank you for being here. Evelyn Claire was once a name spoken with reverence in academic circles, a respected literature professor at Washington State University. She used to receive thank you letters from students decades after graduation, and her lectures on Shakespeare and Emily Dickinson were filled with an emotional depth that lit up the entire hall. But no life stays at its peak forever. After her husband passed away from a stroke, Evelyn left the bustling life in Seattle behind and moved into a modest seaside cottage in Monterey, California, a place she and her husband had vacationed every summer for over 30 years of marriage. The house rested quietly on the shore, with a wooden porch that opened to the sea. Every morning Evelyn brewed her tea, turned on classical music, and watched the gulls glide across the silver waves. To her it was the place to grow old. Not in noise, not in scandal, and most importantly, not having to pretend to be anyone else. But even peace carries a void: the absence of her children. Amanda, her eldest daughter, lived in San Francisco and ran a high-end yoga studio chain. She was popular for her talks on healing and wellness, often featured in podcasts and live streams advising middle-aged women to love themselves. Every phone call to her mother was sweet, filled with concern. But it always ended with a question that stopped Evelyn cold. Mom, make sure you go for your check-ups. Oh, and have you written a will yet? Evelyn never blamed her, but each time she heard that, she felt more like an asset waiting to be divided than a person to be loved. Ross, her son, was a different story. A smooth-talking real estate agent, Ross always looked sharp, but beneath the surface, he seemed constantly stressed. He called less than Amanda, and when he did, it was usually to borrow money. Just a couple thousand, Mom. I'll pay you back. I just need to get over this hump. Evelyn used to hope, used to wait for the day her children would visit her just because they missed her. Not for the holidays, not because of money, but simply because she mattered. Then Julio Ramirez arrived, quietly stepping into Evelyn's solitary world like a gentle breeze. A part-time caregiver assigned by an agency, Julio was a 44-year-old Mexican immigrant, soft-spoken with kind, sorrowful eyes. He was never late, never forgot a task. But what Evelyn valued most wasn't his professionalism, it was his presence. Julio never looked at his phone when she talked. He never asked about money. He simply swept the floors, made ginger tea, brushed her hair on Friday mornings, and if she asked, would read old letters from her late husband out loud. slowly, patiently, as if every word carried a soul. Once, Evelyn joked, "Aren't these love letters a bit too cheesy?" Without hesitation, Julio replied, "I think love is always a little foolish. But if it's sincere, it deserves to be read again and again." For the first time in years, Evelyn laughed without holding back, and she couldn't remember the last time Ross or Amanda had made her laugh like that. Everything changed on a rainy October night. Evelyn slipped in the bathroom. She tried to stand, but couldn't. Her phone was on the sink just a few steps away, but might as well have been miles. She dragged herself, reached for it, and called Amanda. No answer. She called Ross, voicemail. She was about to give up, then remembered what Julio once said, "If there's ever an emergency, call me, anytime." Under a stormy sky, Evelyn dialed his number. 17 minutes later, the sound of tires skidding broke the silence outside. Julio burst through the glass door, lifted her up with a mixture of calm and deep concern. He didn't ask why she hadn't called her kids. He didn't scold her. He just said, "Don't say anything. Let's get you to the hospital first." That night, lying under the sterile white ceiling of the ER, Evelyn thought of her children, one always busy, the other always broke, but neither present when she needed them most. Yet outside in the hallway, on a hard plastic chair, a man with no blood relation to her sat dozing off, still holding a cold cup of coffee. After that night, Evelyn made a decision. She didn't cut ties with her children. She still picked up their calls, still listened to long stories about their work and homes. But she no longer fooled herself into thinking she was truly part of their lives. She knew when she was gone, the only thing Amanda and Ross would truly grieve was her bank account. So Evelyn didn't seek revenge. She didn't confront them. She simply did what was right. She rewrote her will, transferred her entire estate, seaside home, savings, life insurance, and book royalties to Julio, the only one who had ever stayed beside her out of compassion, not obligation. And when the news came out, when Amanda called in desperation and Ross screamed in disbelief, Evelyn calmly answered the phone and said, "I didn't abandon you. I just chose to keep what I believe is real." No one expected a 72-year-old woman to be so clear-eyed. But Evelyn knew, love does not mean enduring everything, and sometimes, the most dignified thing a mother can do is let go, not to walk away from her children, but to protect what little of herself remains. Because in the end, not everyone deserves the love you've carefully nurtured your whole life. And sometimes your final act of giving should be reserved for the one who knows how to cherish it. From the early days of her old age, Evelyn Claire had grown used to silence. Her seaside cottage in Monterey, with its sun-drenched porch and the gentle scent of sea salt wafting through the wooden shutters, had once been the warm heart of a family. It was where the laughter of children once echoed, where a gentle husband once prepared breakfast, and where Evelyn had spent countless late nights reading student essays by the dim glow of a desk lamp. But then her husband passed away. Her two grown children moved away to build their own lives in big cities. Evelyn didn't blame them. She understood the nature of time and personal growth. She never asked them to return or take care of her. All she hoped for was the occasional phone call, a surprise visit at Christmas. That would have been enough. And then things began to change. In a way that felt strange. Amanda, the eldest daughter, once too busy to answer even 3 consecutive calls, suddenly appeared one day with a bouquet of soft lavender, a box of organic vegan pastries, and a glowing smile. "I just want to spend more time with you, Mom," she said, hugging her tightly. The hugs were warm and lingering, her eyes moist with affection, as though there had never been any distance between them. Ross, the younger son who used to leave within an hour of arriving, now brought fine red wine and a freshly printed, glossy photo album filled with old family pictures. He laid it on the table like a precious gift, flipping through the pages, narrating memories as if trying to rekindle a long-extinguished flame. At first, Evelyn was moved. Though she was no longer young, no longer sharp like during her teaching days, the heart of a mother still beat fast when touched by her children's warmth. She silently thanked life, thinking perhaps time had finally taught her children to cherish her. Family dinners made a return. Amanda frequently snapped pictures with Evelyn and posted them online with captions like, "Family is everything," or "Lunch with my beautiful mama." Evelyn, who didn't use social media, simply smiled. She didn't need the world to see it, just needed her children to feel it. But one night, as she stepped out to prepare her nightly warm milk, she overheard Amanda's voice from the living room, soft, but not soft enough to escape the ears of a lifelong professor. "I told you, once she puts our names in the will, that's it, she's weak now. Julio has no legal standing." Evelyn froze on the staircase. Her breath seemed to drain from her chest. She felt as if she had turned to stone. The gifts, the hugs, the photos, it had all been a mask. Ross responded with a mocking chuckle, "Come on. You think a Mexican caregiver has a shot, where the blood, were her real children. Evelyn didn't cry. She just felt a cold emptiness swell inside her chest. Silently, she returned to her study, opened the drawer, and took out an old voice recorder, a tool she once used to capture long lectures in her university days. She walked back to the hallway, pointed the recorder toward the living room, and pressed record, keeping herself perfectly still in that bone-chilling quiet. The conversation between her two children continued, like a secret trial, where the one being judged was her, a mother now elderly, living alone, seen only as valuable if her name remained attached to an estate. The next morning Amanda arrived again, cheerful as ever, carrying celery juice and chatting as if nothing had happened. Evelyn sat there, quietly watching. She didn't confront her, but her gaze had changed. She asked, "Do you think love can be bought with a signature?" Amanda laughed lightly. "What a strange thing to say, Mom. No one can buy love." Evelyn only smiled. That afternoon when Julio arrived for work, Evelyn invited him into her study. Placing her hand on the recorder, she told him everything. Julio, overwhelmed, offered to quit to avoid any further trouble. But Evelyn gently held his hand and said, "No, you didn't cause this. You are the proof that sincerity still exists in a world full of pretense." Evelyn began quietly rearranging everything. She contacted her lawyer and asked to revise her will entirely. She left the beachfront home and her entire savings to Julio, the only person who had ever cared for her with kindness, without expectation, without asking for anything in return. As for Amanda and Ross, she left a letter. Not angry, not accusatory, just truthful. And it ended simply, "Love cannot be faked, and gratitude it cannot be borrowed." The night before the will was read, Evelyn sat by the window, listening to the waves whisper something only she could understand. In the soft moonlight, she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Not because of revenge, but because, at last, she had made the right choice for her heart. Not with tears, but with wisdom, courage, and a belief in the good that still lives in some people, even after enduring deep wounds. And the next day, when the lawyer announced the heir, Amanda and Ross looked at each other in stunned silence. As for Evelyn, she simply turned her gaze back to the sea, where the horizon always meets the truth. On a rainy night in February, the wind from the Monterey coast howled violently, beating against the glass windows of a small house nestled along the bay. Evelyn's home stood isolated between two hills, where the only companions each night were the sound of waves and the relentless gusts of wind. At 72 years old, Evelyn lived alone in the wooden house she and her late husband had built together in their youth. He had been gone for over a decade, leaving behind an endless emptiness, one that no amount of love from her children could ever seem to fill. That night, after turning off the living room lights and pouring herself a warm glass of water, Evelyn was about to return to bed. But a sudden wave of dizziness swept over her, perhaps due to the changing weather or a side effect from a new medication. She carefully set the glass down by the sink. As she turned to leave, her left foot slipped on a small puddle near the bathroom door, and in a heartbeat, her entire body collapsed onto the cold tile floor. The sound of the fall echoed like an explosion through the otherwise silent house. Pain shot through her hip like a vise. She tried to crawl toward the cabinet where her phone was kept. Her trembling hand reached for the screen, squinting through the pain to dial the number she knew by heart. She called Amanda, her eldest daughter. One ring, two rings, then a cold, familiar voicemail. "I can't take your call right now. Please leave a message." Without hesitating, Evelyn called Ross. The line connected, and for a moment a flicker of hope lit inside her. But seconds later a text appeared, "In a meeting. Call emergency services." No question mark. "No, are you okay, Mom?" Evelyn let the phone fall to the floor. The room was freezing. The overhead light cast a dull hue across her face, highlighting every tired crease. Outside, the rain continued to fall, a mournful rhythm tapping against the tin roof. She didn't cry. There were no more tears left, only loneliness rising from the cold tile and creeping into her bones. Then, just as despair settled in, the sound of a key turning echoed through the house. Evelyn stirred in surprise. It was Julio, the only caregiver she still trusted. He had come earlier than usual, bringing garden tools in anticipation of the storm, worried the morning leaves might block her path. As he stepped inside, he noticed the bathroom light still on and her slippers scattered at the doorway. His heart raced. "Mrs. Evelyn," he called gently. No response. When he found her collapsed on the floor, elbows scraped, face pale and breathing hard, he didn't ask a single question. Julio lifted her into his arms, strong but careful, and carried her to his car. On the drive to the hospital, the rain pounded on the windshield as if punctuating the sorrow of the life she clutched to her chest. A life once filled with warmth, once a home for two children, now left abandoned by them. In the emergency room, Julio signed the deposit papers using his own debit card. He didn't hesitate. He stayed through the night, checking in every hour to see if she had woken, if she needed water or another blanket. When the doctor told him Evelyn had fractured her hip and would need at least 2 weeks of observation, he simply nodded. "I'll stay." And he did, not out of duty, not for money, but for something far simpler: human decency. 3 days later, Amanda sent a short text, "Is Mom okay?" Ross called briefly near midnight, asking only when will she be discharged. Neither came to visit. No flowers, no thank you for Julio, the man who had saved their mother. Evelyn lay in bed staring out the hospital window. The room was stark white, but her eyes welled up, not from pain but because for the first time in many years, she felt truly seen. Julio never spoke much, but his eyes, the gentle way he coaxed her to sleep, how he picked up her fallen shawl and draped it softly over her shoulders, all of it made Evelyn feel like she wasn't a burden, but a person worthy of care. And in that quiet room, she admitted something she had never dared to before: perhaps family isn't about blood. It's about how people treat you when no one is watching. She remembered something her husband once said: "When the kids are grown, you'll see. Sometimes strangers are kinder than kin." She had rejected that idea then, but now she understood, not just with her mind, but with the aches in her back, the silence on her phone, and the warmth from a man who had every reason to walk away, but stayed. From that day forward, Evelyn was no longer the mother who waited in silence. She began documenting everything, not out of bitterness, but so she'd never forget she had been abandoned, but saved by someone kind, who asked for nothing. Someone who, in the most vulnerable moment of her life, chose to walk in, when those she called family chose to walk away. Under the fading sunlight of a Monterey autumn, as sea winds carried the bitter scent of salt past the hospital window, Evelyn Claire began to feel something she had never allowed herself to admit in over 70 years of life: she was lonely. Not the loud kind of loneliness born from abandonment, but the quiet ache that comes from the cold presence of those who are supposed to be your safe haven. After that sudden fall in the bathroom on a rainy night, there were no urgent calls from her daughter or son. No one rushed to hold her hand. No one asked, "Are you okay, Mom?" They were always busy. Amanda sent a single text: "I'm teaching a class. Call 911. Ross replied with a message as cold as stone: "In a meeting with clients." Not a good time. The one who showed up was Julio, the quiet Mexican caregiver whose face always held a gentle solemnity, and whose movements were so deliberate they made even a glass of water feel like a sacred offering. Julio had come earlier than usual. He brought with him a small cloth bag filled with herbal teas Evelyn liked, and a light cardigan she'd forgotten the day before. When he opened the door and found her lying on the cold tile floor, he didn't ask questions. He didn't panic. He didn't blame anyone. He simply lifted her, wrapped her in a blanket the way a mother would swaddle a child, and drove her to the hospital in his old silver pickup. During those days in the hospital, life began to slow down. No more tightly packed schedules her children had crafted for her. Schedules that felt less like care and more like control. No more forced smiles over artificial lunches. No more saccharine praise like, "You're such an inspiration," or "You've made me rethink aging." Instead, there was peace. Julio said little. He'd stop by, slice a few apples, steep a cup of warm tea, read a short poem from her favorite book. Sometimes he'd share stories of his hometown, Oaxaca, where his mother had lived in a small adobe house with bougainvillea crawling across the tiled roof. Evelyn didn't need to ask. The details Julio shared made her feel as though she had once wandered that place in some distant dream. One afternoon, bathed in golden light streaming through the window, Julio handed her an old photo. His mother, a woman with a soft smile and round dark eyes that shone with quiet strength. "She passed away while I was working in Los Angeles," he said, his voice unsteady. "I didn't make it in time. All she wanted was one last meal together." Evelyn held her breath. That story wasn't unfamiliar. It was her fear, given form to die in that windswept house by the sea alone, her calls unanswered. From that moment on, few words were needed between them. They began reading together, listening to instrumental music, or simply sitting in silence, staring out the window. Every time Julio gently placed his hand on her shoulder to help her walk, Evelyn felt the care wasn't born of duty or inheritance, but of empathy. The heart of someone who had once loved a mother, and was now, silently, caring for another. On the day she was discharged, when the nurse wheeled her toward the exit, Evelyn felt light, as if shedding an armor she had worn for decades. Amanda didn't come, neither did Ross. Only Julio stood waiting, a steady pillar in a world full of shifting sands. Evelyn didn't cry, but her eyes shimmered with something soft, not sorrow but the return of trust in human kindness. Back home, everything was the same: the old bookshelves, the warm scent of pine wood, the dust-covered piano. But this time the house didn't feel empty. Evelyn invited Julio to stay. They had dinner together. She told him stories about her late husband fixing the leaking roof. Julio chuckled and shared how his mother once punished him for skipping school to play soccer. Two people, two worlds. Two generations, yet sitting like kin, no roles to perform. Evelyn knew her life was about to enter a new chapter. No more curated tea parties with Amanda. No more late-night calls from Ross asking, "Do you have any money to invest?" Instead, she had a friend, someone who came for her, not for the name in her will. And one quiet evening, with the sea murmuring steadily like an aging but steady heartbeat, Evelyn signed a new will. No bitterness, no announcement. But for the first time in her life, she knew she was doing the right thing, for someone who had truly cared. Evelyn didn't seek revenge, she sought peace. And for the first time in her life, she felt she could finally live, not as a mother taken for granted, but as a woman who was loved. On an early morning in Monterey, with the mist still hugging the rooftops along the coast, Evelyn Claire woke earlier than usual. The faint light leaking through the windows cast a subdued, distant hue across the room. She couldn't sleep. Something inside her stirred, a vague, restless unease she couldn't quite name. Since the accident in the bathroom, Evelyn no longer believed in the permanence of family. Once, she had thought if she loved enough, her children would eventually understand. That if she never complained or criticized, love would naturally follow. But things had changed. Since the hospital stay, Evelyn had come to feel the gaps left by Amanda and Ross, not just in their absences, but in their hollow presences. Amanda remained sweet as ever, always smiling, always arriving with snacks and flowers in hand. But Evelyn could see clearly now. Her daughter's eyes no longer held genuine concern, only a carefully concealed impatience. Ross made no attempt to hide anything. His questions about the house deed, her savings, and "who'll manage the estate when you're gone?" came up over and over again, delivered less like a son checking on his mother, and more like a businessman reviewing a portfolio. One afternoon, as Evelyn tried to access her bank account to verify the hospital expenses Julio had covered, she noticed an email notification pop up from an old inbox Ross once used to help manage her finances. She almost closed it, but paused. Her eyes froze on the subject line, "Asset Plan Breakdown Amanda and Ross." A chill ran down her spine. She clicked. The email thread unraveled before her, word for word, line by line, each sentence slicing into her heart like a cold blade. "Amanda, we should ease mom into a care facility. Say it's just temporary for rest, then we handle the rest. Ross, right. This house sells high in the fall. Don't let her give that housekeeper anything. Amanda, I'll take care of the talk. I'll say we need her to transfer the assets to minimize legal risk. She trusts me. Ross, you're mom's golden child. It'll be easy." Evelyn sat motionless, eyes wide open, her gaze drifting far beyond the screen. What she had feared, what she had quietly suspected, now stood before her, sharp and undeniable. This wasn't doubt anymore, it was truth, raw and bitter. She didn't cry. At her age, shocks no longer brought her to her knees. Instead, she quietly printed the entire thread, page by page, neatly slid them into a navy leather folder. She labeled it "Confidential, direct to Latham Mr. Latham had been her private attorney for decades. The only person who truly knew Evelyn might be quiet but never weak. That afternoon, Amanda dropped by. She brought a bouquet of white tulips, the very flower Evelyn had once said she disliked for being as pale and empty as promises with no color. Amanda kissed her cheek, held her warmly, and chirped with sugar-coated sweetness, "Have you eaten? Mom missed me." Evelyn smiled, gentle but distant. She invited her daughter to sit, poured tea, then folded her hands calmly across the table. "Sweetheart," she began slowly, "if one day I left everything to someone else, would that make you sad?" Amanda paused, just for a heartbeat. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. But then, that smile again. Practiced, effortless. "Don't say that, Mom. You know I love you." "I don't care about any of that." Evelyn nodded, still smiling. "I was just asking," she said softly. That evening, Evelyn sat for a long time in the living room. The breeze from the sea slipped through the open window, carrying the scent of salt and thyme. She closed her eyes and pictured her children when they were young, clinging to her arms, giggling, not yet aware of words like inheritance or how to disguise greed as care. Then she thought of Julio, the quiet man who had never missed a shift, not even on stormy days. The one who never asked about savings or deeds. The one who simply brought warm soup when she had a fever, or double, checked her medication with the gentleness of a son. Evelyn was not one to act impulsively, but she knew it was time to rewrite the will. And this time, she wouldn't write it as a mother, but as a human being who understood what was real and what was a performance. The house wasn't the most valuable thing. What mattered was this: when she left this world, she would know she hadn't been used. She would know she had lived with clarity, and she had chosen right. At an old law office tucked away on a quiet corner of Monterey, the sound of pens scratching across paper echoed gently but decisively. Evelyn Claire, a woman who had lived through more than 7 decades of life, sat pensively at the oak desk, the soft afternoon light filtering through a frosted window, casting a golden glow on her silver hair. In front of her was a new draft of her will, not the first she had ever signed, but the only one written with full clarity and the quiet awakening that comes at the end of a long road. This was no longer the kind of document written in the haze of maternal guilt, nor was it a reluctant compromise between reason and love. This time, Evelyn signed with rare precision. She knew exactly what she was doing, and exactly why she had to do it. Julio Ramirez, the soft-spoken man with a gentle smile, was the only one by her side, not out of obligation nor inheritance, but out of sheer kindness. For the past 3 years, through quiet afternoons and pain-ridden evenings, when her joints failed and she needed help just standing, Julio was there. No flattery, no complaints, no agenda. He became a quiet rhythm in her life, a presence that needed no performance to be felt. Evelyn once intended to leave everything to Amanda and Ross, the 2 children she once believed were her whole world. But time does more than age the body. It strips away illusions. The phone calls that came only between meetings, the rushed visits that ended with social media posts saying, "Mom's doing great," the dinners that weren't finished before someone got up to leave because the client can't wait, all became fragile echoes of a mother's misplaced trust. That trust didn't break in a single moment. It eroded slowly, with every ignored call, every empty promise, every look that didn't see her anymore. This new will wasn't a punishment. Evelyn wasn't seeking gratitude nor legacy. She simply wanted to place what she had into the hands of someone who deserved it. Julio, who had quietly cleaned her vomit at the hospital when she collapsed, who had stayed up all night by her bed during a cold, rainy storm when she woke in pain, who once told her about his own mother, a lonely Mexican woman he never made it home in time to say goodbye to. He knew what loneliness was, and because of that, he understood the value of simply showing up. The new will gave everything to Julio, the coastal home where Evelyn had lived with her husband for over 30 years, where they laughed, cried, and buried their son's first dog in the backyard. The 400,000 savings, earned through scholarships, book royalties, and her late husband's pension. The life insurance policy, his final gift to her, and the copyrights to the more than 10 books she had written, both under her real name and a quiet pen name. She left it all to the only person who had never once asked. There was no special occasion, no announcement, no family gathering. After signing, Evelyn simply asked her lawyer to send 2 letters, one to Amanda, one to Ross, not filled with blame, just words. The kind a mother might still offer to children who'd lost their way. "My dear, if you read this and feel angry, I understand. I've been angry with myself, for teaching you love without limits, for giving without boundaries, for confusing sacrifice with good parenting. But now, I no longer have time to start again. I only hope what I've done makes you think about what's real, what's not, and what's lost forever when we stop treasuring each other. Send, simply Mom." No tears, no regrets. Evelyn stood, wrapped her pale gray shawl around her shoulders, and stepped out of the law office. Her eyes lifted toward the sea, now bathed in a deepening shade of violet. A breeze passed, lifting a strand of her silver hair, and for a brief moment, she looked like someone finally unburdened from the weight of a life now in order. In life, there are times we let go, not because we've stopped loving, but because we've loved too much and can no longer bear to be hurt again. And that letting go, was her final act of dignity, the last choice of a mother who gave everything, and in the end was seen only as a bridge to be crossed and forgotten. On a gloomy Monday morning, as fog draped gently over the rooftops of coastal Monterey and the smell of sea salt drifted through every icy breeze, the funeral of Evelyn Claire took place, solemn, dignified, but strangely suffocating. White flower wreaths were arranged with meticulous care. One by one, guests arrived, their faces bearing the appropriate somber expression, but no one truly cried. Instead, there was only a quiet formal mourning, expressed through cold handshakes and hollow words of sympathy. Amanda and Ross, Evelyn's 2 biological children, stood at the front, hands clasped together like 2 people united in grief. They wore black, their expressions timed just right, eyes slightly glassy, as if they'd spent a long, sleepless night in sorrow. But no one knew, behind the polished performance of sorrow, a very different fire was burning: anticipation. Ross had said to Amanda the night before the funeral, "Just a few more days and everything will be ours. The house, the accounts, all of it." Amanda didn't argue. She just nodded, her eyes shining with unfiltered excitement. For her, their mother's passing meant the end of pretending. No more forced smiles, no more rushed visits just for a family time, Photo on social media. Ross was simpler. That house would solve all his mounting debts. 3 days later, they arrived at the office of Attorney Sanderson, a silver-haired man with steel-rimmed glasses and eyes that had seen too much to be easily deceived. He had been a lifelong friend of Evelyn's, the one who read the first draft of her first novel and helped her win back publishing rights after a long legal dispute. Amanda and Ross sat across from him, barely concealing their confidence. They were sure they were the rightful heirs. Because that's how it's supposed to be, because it's only fair. But life doesn't measure fairness by how things seem. The attorney opened a sealed yellow envelope and pulled out the final, notarized will. He began reading in a steady voice, not rushed, not theatrical, but every word sliced deeper into the thin shell of hope they had wrapped around themselves. I, Evelyn Claire, in full possession of my mental faculties, leave all of my assets to Mr. Julio Ramirez, who cared for me with dedication, honesty, and without ever expecting anything in return. The inheritance includes my house in Monterey, all bank accounts, life insurance policies, literary copyrights, and personal keepsakes. The reason is simple: because he was the only one truly present in the final years of my life. The room froze. Amanda's mouth fell open, her lips trembling, but no sound came out. Ross slammed his hand on the table, his face flushed with rage. This is impossible. My mother wouldn't do this. The attorney didn't respond. He simply reached into his briefcase, pulled out a small recorder, and pressed play. A crystal clear recording played. Evelyn's private conversation. She had secretly captured Ross's voice. As long as she puts our names in the will, we're good. She's getting weak. Evelyn's voice followed, calm, steady, but with a weight that crushed the room. If I left everything to someone else, would you be upset? Amanda lunged forward, nearly shouting. That was a joke. That can't be real still. The attorney didn't flinch. He placed 2 small envelopes on the table. Mrs. Evelyn left each of you a handwritten letter. Nothing more. Just her final words. Amanda snatched hers, her hands shaking as she unfolded it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in that familiar, delicate script. My beloved daughter, some things in life can't be measured by blood. I once hoped that family ties would conquer all. But I was wrong. Don't blame me for leaving everything to someone else. Blame yourself for leaving my heart empty long before this day, Mom. Ross's letter was nearly identical. He didn't finish reading it. His fist clenched, his jaw tightened. But it wasn't grief. It was the collapse of a plan they believed foolproof. Meanwhile, in a very different place, a modest wooden house by the sea, Julio was watering the lavender plants Evelyn had once loved. He knew nothing of the will's reading, nothing of the outrage, the shouting, or the betrayal unfolding in that cold legal office. All he knew was that the woman who once called him her only true family had passed peacefully and left behind not just assets but a legacy of trust. In silence, he stepped into the house, sat in the old wooden chair by the fireplace, the same spot where Evelyn had read for hours. Beside him lay her final manuscript, unfinished. Julio opened the first page, touched the handwritten line at the top, for the one who believed in me, when I no longer believed in myself. Outside, the waves rolled steadily against the shore, and within that quiet house, a new chapter began, not written by blood but by an unspoken, steadfast loyalty. Evelyn was gone, but she left no regrets, only a lesson that family cannot be bought, and love is not a duty, it's a choice, and she chose the one who was true. When word of the will spread, all of Monterey was abuzz. Some called it the proud revenge of a mother abandoned. Others gossiped that Evelyn Claire had been reckless, leaving everything to a Mexican caregiver, a man known to almost no one beyond the name, Julio. But to Julio Ramirez the whispers were like passing winds. He had no need to explain himself. And Evelyn, were she still alive, would never have needed anyone to defend her decision either. Because genuine love doesn't require justification. It speaks for itself. Julio didn't move into the grand seaside villa, even though he had every legal right. No matter how beautiful or spacious it was, the house could never hold the peace Evelyn once brought to his life. Instead, he chose to sell the estate, not out of ingratitude, but because he wanted to turn the rest of his life into a gift for those like Evelyn, once forgotten, now remembered. He poured every penny of the inheritance, along with his own savings, into buying an abandoned plot of land on the northern outskirts of Monterey. It was once a decaying nursing facility. Now, it would become something else, bright, warm, free of the smell of mildew or the echo of groaning voices. Julio named it Casa Evelyn, Evelyn's home, not a nursing home, not a cold, clinical facility, but a sanctuary, a place where aging wouldn't mean loneliness. He hired staff not just by qualifications but by heart, people who had cared for their ailing parents with their own hands, people who knew what it meant to give without expecting. Julio told them, We don't care for the elderly like clients. We welcome them like family. The world is left behind. Casa Evelyn opened shortly after. Word spread quickly across California, a care center for the elderly completely free of charge, for those who could no longer afford to be cared for, the only requirement to be human, and to have once felt forgotten. On Inauguration Day in the main common room, Julio hung a black and white photo of Evelyn Claire. It was taken from behind. She sat reading on her porch, the golden afternoon sun bathing her silver hair. Below the image, just one line: real love doesn't ask for anything back. No one from Evelyn's family came to the opening, just a few old neighbors. But that didn't matter. The elderly who arrived at Casa Evelyn, they understood, they felt it. Because for the first time in years they were called by name. Asked, "Did you sleep well?" Listened to classical music in the morning, and received hugs for no reason at all. There was an 84-year-old woman named Linda, once a nurse in the Vietnam War. When she moved in, she carried only a small suitcase and a skeptical look. A week later, with tears in her eyes, she placed a hand on Julio's shoulder and whispered, "I don't know who the woman in that photo is, but she must have been an angel. And you, Julia, you are a miracle." Julio didn't respond. He simply smiled. It was a smile he had learned from Evelyn, gentle, quiet, unassuming, but powerful enough to make someone feel seen. In every room of Casa Evelyn, he placed a small frame engraved with the words, "If you've ever felt forgotten, know that somewhere someone remembers you." Time passed. Julio never became a hero. He received no medals, no interviews, no front-page headlines, but he became something more enduring, a guardian of kindness. Every night, before switching off the lights, he walked through the house in silence, checking the windows, adjusting a pillow under someone's sleepy head, draping a thin blanket over the shoulders of a dozing man in a wheelchair. He never complained, never grew tired, because Julio knew he was keeping a flame alive, a flame Evelyn had left behind, the flame of selfless care, of unconditional love. And though no one said it aloud, everyone knew, Evelyn never truly left. She lived on, in every soft note of morning music, in the smell of cinnamon tea from the kitchen, in the rocking chair on the porch, but most of all, in the hearts of those who had once believed the world had forgotten them. At Casa Evelyn, people didn't come to wait for death. They came to live again, as human beings worthy of love, and all of it was made possible by one woman who chose for herself a quiet ending, but left behind a legacy of humanity. There are things in life we often take for granted, like family, like a child's gratitude, like the belief that if we love enough, we will be loved in return. But reality isn't always so gentle. Sometimes, it is the very people who share your blood who hurt you the most. And sometimes, a stranger's hand is the only one that truly touches your heart, not out of obligation, not out of gain, but simply because they care. You can spend your entire life sacrificing, nurturing, building a future for your children, from every meal to every book, from sleepless nights to dreams you gave up so they could chase their own. But no one can teach them gratitude. No one can force a heart to care just because it's called mom or dad. When love is measured in money, in inheritance, in property, no matter how bright it may seem, it is never real. Life has a cruel way of revealing truths, often when you're at your weakest. When a single fall shatters not just your body but your trust, that's when you see who truly stays. Not everyone who calls you mother loves you. Not everyone who shares your blood will care for you when you're silently breaking. And not everyone who sat beside you at a full table will remain when your hands are empty. Sometimes a stranger, perhaps a driver, a nurse, someone with nothing in common but presence, is the only one who sees you as a human being, not as a walking bank account. They may be the only person who looks at you without calculation, without seeing a will, without weighing the value of your home, but simply sees someone who needs kindness. Evelyn learned that in the final years of her life, and her decision wasn't revenge. It was the quiet act of a woman who had loved, been wounded, forgiven, and in the end, chose to believe in something better. She didn't need her children to apologize. She didn't need justice. She just needed to know that, even once, the goodness she gave had taken root and would continue to grow in others. Through a man named Julio, through a home named Casa Evelyn, and through hearts that had long gone cold from loneliness. Dear listener, if you've ever been hurt by someone you trusted, if you've ever cried because you felt unworthy of love, remember this: your worth is not defined by who chooses you, but by the fact that you keep choosing to be kind, to keep loving, even when no one loves you back. Don't judge someone by what they call you. Watch how they stay, quietly, patiently, when you have nothing left to offer. Because sometimes a sincere stranger is far better than a pretending relative. If this story touched a part of your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Sarah Stories, where we continue to share powerful tales about family, choices, and compassion. Thank you for listening.